What does this attack mean for the ongoing risks of global terrorism? What does it mean for freedom of expression in France and around the world? And what impact will the attacks have on the Muslim community in France and the rest of Europe? Joining me on set to discuss this is Stanislas de Saint-Hippolyte, Washington correspondent for France 24 News Network. Joining us from our newsroom is Cedric Layton, a well-known terrorism expert. We also have Manal Omar on the set. She is the acting vice president for the Middle East and Africa Center at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Joining us from Sacramento in California is Frank Romano, an active member of the multi-faith group in Paris. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Stan, let me start with you. What can you tell us about this magazine, Charlie Hebdo? This is not the first time it's been at the center of a controversy, and certainly not the first time it's been attacked.
Yeah, no, in 2011, Charlie Hebdo was already set on fire. I mean, some people just launched some Molotov cocktails on it because they decided to publish a cartoon about the Prophet Muhammad. So even one of the cartoonists was put on the wanted list by Al-Qaeda as one of the guys just to get rid of. And the guys who attacked yesterday, that's the first thing they said when they were in the street. We gave vengeance to the Prophet Muhammad. So no, it was not the first time. And that's one controversy with Islamists, but Charlie Hebdo was very known for all its controversies with every group, existing group, with Catholics, with Jews, with everybody in France.
Manal, it seems that there's already been some kind of backlash after this attack. And, you know, we have seen over the past few months there's been growing support for far right-wing groups, political groups in France, political parties. There's been that very big, major anti-Islam demonstration which took place in Germany. Is this going to lead to more polarization, even deeper divisions?
Unfortunately, I think that this incident is going to lead to more polarization and an increase in Islamophobia. I think one of the biggest challenges is when you see a crime like this and a real tragedy is being able to identify it as such, a tragedy. However, once we start grouping a very small group of Muslims and start talking about what is the role of Islam, what is the ideology of Islam, how do we react, why are Muslims not condemning, those questions in themselves then put responsibility on a billion Muslims who really are not tied to this incident. It's still a small extremist group. I think the more that media and politicians can do to de-link the two is the real answer in order not to lead to further divisions, further polarization, and in reality, further violence.
Frank Romano in Sacramento, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, we hear a lot about that. It's a central tenet of Western democracies. Journalists are being very brave about this. They're saying right now, we will not be intimidated, we will not give in to terrorists. But are newspapers and magazines getting to the point where they're going to be very careful about what they can publish, what they want to publish, what they do publish?
Well, to answer that directly, in France and in most other European countries, satire is fundamental. They have hundreds of cartoonists. And now what we have to understand is the freedom of the press is not absolute to the extent that for one culture, satire, including lampooning, even prophets and so forth, is totally acceptable and important. Not so adaptable to other cultures. Now in France, there's 20% Muslim, and most of them are not extremist. So there's that aspect of it. But what's most startling is when there is a freedom of the press issue, freedom of the press is balanced against state interests to find out if the freedom of the press has been violated. Here, we have freedom of the press balanced against an extremist group interpreting what Charlie Hebdo had said before or intends to say about Islam, trying to eradicate that language, totally skewing the idea of freedom of the press and relating, as the other person interviewed saying, it's focusing basically on an extremist group. It's not Islam, and most Muslims would not support this attack. So freedom of the press is fundamental, and I think the underlying important incident in France is French people are saying, look, we are afraid, but we're mobilizing, and we're not going to allow any group to take away, to literally eradicate language, to take away our satire. We're not going to allow them to dictate what we see, hear, and read.
Cedric Layton, what did you make of the attack itself and the manner in which it was carried out? Do you think it was carried out by just a group acting on its own, or were they part of a bigger group, perhaps Al-Qaeda?
Well, I think, Anand, they could have done it certainly on their own. It was possible to plan something like this, but it's very clear to me that they had training. And the question is, where did they get that training? So there are some reports right now that indicate that they were trained, or at least one of them was trained in Yemen. Possibly another one went to Syria. This is, of course, in the very beginning stages of the investigation, so we're not quite sure exactly what happened, but the techniques that they used, the tactics that they employed, make it very clear to me that they had some urban warfare training. They understood what they were doing. They understood the capabilities of their weapons that they were using, which were AK-47 rifles. And they were able to use those weapons in a very effective, very targeted manner. So these people had experience. They clearly had the training. They may have had direction from elsewhere, but it was not necessary for them to carry out this type of mission and this attack.
Stan, I want to ask you that question that I just put to Frank Romano, and that is you. I mean, you're in the front line. You're a French journalist. What do your colleagues, what do your friends think of what is going on in France right now? And are they going to be really careful about what they publish?
I think, you know what, it's like the attack on the Twin Towers. You don't shut up people by attacking them. On the contrary, they will get stronger, they will have a stronger response. Look, for instance, Charlie Hebdo, which was attacked, usually publish around 60,000 copies a week. It's going to publish its next issue next Wednesday, 1 million copies. And for that, because they don't have a full team right now, they don't have any computers left, everything has been broken inside the newsroom. They have been hosted by another newspaper, Libération in France. They got some help from different French groups, French TVs, and they're going to do this massive publication, 1 million. I could bet that they will sell every one of them.
Now, there is an argument being made that many of the young Muslims who are radicalized are being driven by the fact that they're not really accepted in these societies in which they live. They're being discriminated against as well. Is that the case?
I think it's very hard to bring in all the different issues when you're talking about grievances and foreign policy, when you're talking about domestic issues. I don't necessarily like to get into those reasons because any form of violence is wrong, and the Muslim community has been very vocal about saying that any type of extremism and violence is wrong, no matter what the excuse, legitimate or not legitimate, I think is irrelevant. The other issue too, which we continue to highlight, is really taking into fact that most of the extremists are actually killing other Muslims. The predominant people who are being killed by these extremist groups are Muslims. Even in this case, there was a Muslim French police officer who was killed in the attack. And so in that sense, it really should be built on unity. Everyone is a victim here, isolating those extremists, not trying to legitimize the reasons that they're building on, where they're being trained and then coming back to Europe. I'd like to take away those reasons and really just focus on the fact that this is a crime, it's a tragedy. Every French citizen was affected, and that includes the 20% Muslims, as well as the global Muslim community, who are deeply saddened to see violence being done in the name of the Prophet, who's preached nothing other than peace.
Right, Frank, I want to read to you an argument that is being made by the Catholic League here in the United States and what it says about the attack. It says, killing in response to insult, no matter how gross, must be condemned. That is why what happened in Paris cannot be tolerated. But neither can we tolerate the kind of intolerance that provoked this violent reaction. Those who work at the newspaper have a long and disgusting record of going way beyond mere lampooning of public figures. They've shown nuns masturbating, popes wearing condoms, and the Prophet in pornographic poses. When the editor was asked in 2012 why he insults Muslims, he said, "Muhammad is not sacred to me." What do you make of that?
Well, yes, reporting and satire again, you have a choice. With cartoons, of course, or illustrations, we say, speak 1,000 words. Very effective in communicating ideas, but there's a choice. It either could be gratuitous provocation. And I believe, you know, for instance, one of the cartoons showed Muhammad asking someone filming his rear end, "How is my rear end?" and examples that you just gave, Anand. That's gratuitous provocation. The other possibility is, which I think the most significant contribution of satire, is it inspires debate, which is very important for the democratic process. But the gratuitous provocation, even, unfortunately, Charbonnier, the editor who died yesterday, said, we do go over the line. We push the envelope, and it does go over the line, and we admit that. We provoke. But we justify it in this case because we are at war with Islamists. So even though we go over the line, we're fighting and we're provoking. On the other hand, they were expecting an attack. But to add to this, Anand, I believe this is a global issue. mainstream news, which I think we can add to in this interview today, we can go beyond what's happening in France. What is radicalizing, and I will add to what the last interviewer said and support what she said, but on a global scale, I think a lot of the radicalized Muslims and other religions is due to the incompetence of our foreign policy. Mr. Obama had a chance to help the progressive Syrians, the non-Islamist Syrians, 2 years ago, turned his back on it, and then recently said, let's help them. And then Prime Minister Netanyahu has not worked with progressive Palestinians that see their land being taken every day in the West Bank, radicalizing them. So due to incompetent foreign policy, I think partially is one of the reasons why these groups are becoming more and more radicalized, thinking that they are now victims. And the other thing is that ISIS made a proclamation in September, all Europeans must be attacked on jihad. And then we had a jihadist group in Algeria. Mind you, these two killers that they're looking for from Algeria originally, at least roots in Algeria, decapitated a French person in Algeria right after the ISIS leader said jihad. So we are linked to what's going on in Syria. This is a global movement, and I think, to add to the other interview, I think it's possible there's a network here, because these gentlemen were very well trained, and they had bulletproof vests. There's something going on here. There's a network here somewhere.
Cedric, what are the dangers of a backlash right now? We heard from a French judge, a very alarming statement in which he said that the French have to get used to the idea of terrorism. It's here to stay. It's not going to be eradicated.
Anand, I think the whole idea when it comes to backlash is it's always possible in cases like this. Yes, these people were well trained, appear to have been well trained. There are other fellow travelers with them. It's pretty clear, that the French police have picked up, I think it's about 9 extra people, and those 9 people may be part of another cell, or may be part of the same cell. It's very early to tell, but if they're part of the same cell, it shows that there was a lot of logistical preparation, and that logistical preparation would entail the possibility of a very strong backlash. So the French judge has a very good point to make, and I think that not only is there an ideological issue here, but there's also that operational momentum that these groups may get from attacks like this, and that's, I think, the real danger in this case.